Have you ever felt like the deeper you think, the more alone you feel? Like the more clearly you see the world, the less people want to hear what you have to say? You're not imagining things. Society has always had a complicated relationship with deep thinkers, not because they're wrong, but because they see things that others would rather not. History backs this up. Socrates, Galileo, Tesla, these weren't people who lacked intelligence, quite the opposite. But they made people uncomfortable. And when people feel uncomfortable, they push back. They silence, ridicule, or ignore. Not because the ideas are foolish, but because they hit too close to home. One philosopher, Arthur Schopenhauer, was brutally honest about this. He believed intelligence wasn't a blessing, it was a curse. A sharp intellect doesn't necessarily open doors. More often, it closes them. It can isolate. It can make you feel like you're speaking a different language, even when you're surrounded by people. But why is that? Why does society resist those who think differently? The answer lives deep in our psychology. Let's break it down. Think about how we respond to different kinds of superiority. If you're standing next to someone who's physically stronger, you don't usually feel attacked. You might admire their strength. If someone's rich, you might feel a little envious, but not personally insulted. Now let's flip it. When you meet someone who's intellectually superior, something different happens. It's not just about admiration or envy. There's often an underlying discomfort. And psychologists have a name for this. It's called the mirror effect. Here's how it works. A deep thinker doesn't just bring new ideas to the table. They hold up a mirror. They reflect back the limitations, the gaps, the blind spots of the people around them. And people don't like what they see. Even if the deep thinker says nothing at all, their presence alone can feel like a challenge. Why? Because intelligence hits us in a place that's personal, our identity. Our thoughts, beliefs, our view of the world. That's how we define who we are. So when someone comes along who sees deeper, who questions what we take for granted, it can feel like a threat. Not to our opinions, but to our very sense of self. That's why intelligence often triggers resistance instead of admiration. Not because the deep thinker is condescending or rude, but because they force people to confront uncomfortable truths. And most people don't forgive that easily. This is why, historically, deep thinkers often find themselves pushed to the margins. Not because they want to be alone, but because society makes it hard for them to belong. Have you ever been in a casual conversation and tried to introduce a deep or challenging idea, only to be met with blank stares, awkward silence, or a quick change of topic? That's not just bad luck. That's a defense mechanism at work. When people encounter depth of thought, depth of insight, their brains go into self-preservation mode. Instead of leaning in, they back off. Instead of engaging, they dismiss. It's not that they don't hear you, it's that they don't want to feel what your words make them feel. Interestingly, studies show that in social settings, confidence is often valued more than intelligence. People are drawn to certainty, even if it's shallow. That's why motivational speakers, populist leaders, and flashy influencers gain massive followings. They give people what they want to hear, wrapped in certainty and charisma. Meanwhile, the person who speaks with nuance, the one who says, "Well, it's complicated," often gets ignored. It's ironic, right? The deeper someone thinks, the harder it becomes to share that depth. The more they seek truth, the more disconnected they can feel from the mainstream. And this isn't just a social issue, it's biological. Neuroscience backs this up. Studies have shown that when people feel intellectually outmatched, their amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for detecting threats, lights up. That's the same response we have when we feel physically endangered. In other words, deep thinking doesn't just intimidate people, it literally makes their brain react as if they're under attack. But why would our brains treat intelligence like a threat?
The answer goes back to how we evolved. For most of human history, survival wasn't about being the smartest. It was about being accepted by the group. If you were rejected or excluded from your tribe, that could mean death. So our brains were wired to prioritize belonging over truth. So what happens when someone walks into a room and starts challenging norms, asking uncomfortable questions?
But let's take this a step deeper, because this resistance to deep thinking isn't just about insecurity or discomfort. It's biological, it's psychological, it's cultural, and it's backed by science. Modern neuroscience actually confirms what many deep thinkers have felt their entire lives, that their presence doesn't just stir curiosity, it can actually trigger fear. Studies have shown that when someone feels intellectually outmatched, their amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for fear and threat detection, lights up. In other words, encountering someone who seems too smart doesn't just make people uncomfortable, it activates the same internal alarm system as facing a predator. Why? Why does intelligence trigger the same circuits as physical danger? To understand that, we need to go back in time, way back. For most of human history, being the smartest person in the room wasn't nearly as important as being part of the group. Survival depended on social harmony. The tribe came first. You needed to be accepted, trusted, and non-threatened to avoid exile. And exile meant vulnerability, possibly death. That primal wiring still exists in our brains today. So, when a deep thinker enters a room and starts asking uncomfortable questions or seeing things others don't, it can feel like a disruption to that tribal safety. It doesn't matter if the thinker has good intentions. Their presence alone can upset the delicate balance of group dynamics. They become the one who threatens harmony, who questions the unspoken rules. And the group reacts accordingly, by shutting them out. In fact, a 2021 study from Stanford uncovered something fascinating about this pattern. It turns out people are far less threatened by deep thinkers in one-on-one settings. But in group environments, that fear response spikes. Why? Because group settings come with an added layer of pressure, social status. Suddenly, it's not just about your own reaction to the thinker, it's about how you look in comparison. If someone appears more insightful or more articulate in front of others, it can feel like a direct threat to your social standing. And people instinctively defend their place in the hierarchy, often by undermining or excluding the person who makes them feel small. This is why many deep thinkers find more meaningful conversations in private, but feel totally drained in larger social spaces. It's not just introversion, it's the clash between depth and the unconscious group psychology that favors sameness over insight. Psychologists have even named some of the cognitive biases that fuel this reaction. There's the Dunning-Kruger effect, where people with low ability often overestimate their intelligence, while those who are truly intelligent underestimate themselves. That creates a kind of friction. People who don't know much believe they know enough and dismiss those who know far more. Meanwhile, the truly intelligent second-guess themselves, adding nuance and caution to their ideas. And in a society that equates confidence with credibility, the loudest voice often drowns out the wisest. Then there's status quo bias, the brain's preference for familiar ideas over complex or disruptive truths. Intelligence often introduces uncomfortable insights. It challenges what people believe, and that threatens their sense of stability. And maybe the most frustrating of all, the backfire effect. This happens when people are presented with evidence that contradicts their beliefs, and instead of reconsidering, they double down. It's why arguing logic with someone rarely changes their mind. Deep thinkers don't just bring new information, they challenge the very foundations people have built their worldview on. In today's digital world, this resistance is amplified like never before. Social media algorithms are designed to reward engagement, not accuracy, not depth, not critical thinking. Content that goes viral is often the most emotionally charged, the most simplistic, or the most polarizing.
Deep, thoughtful ideas, they struggle to compete in that environment. They take time to process, and time is something people rarely give. If you scroll through your feed, what do you see? Flashy headlines, outrage, feel-good cliches, 10-second takes that oversimplify complex topics. Why? Because those things are easy to digest. They don't make people think too hard. And when they do, people swipe past them. The algorithm notices, and it learns. Over time, intellectual content gets buried while noise rises to the top. This creates echo chambers, online spaces where people only hear ideas that reinforce what they already believe. New perspectives, especially those that challenge the norm, get filtered out. Deep thinkers are either ignored, misunderstood, or attacked for asking the wrong questions.
You begin editing yourself, cutting the edges off your thoughts to fit inside boxes that were never meant to contain you. You talk about the weather instead of the human condition. You laugh at jokes that don't land. You stay silent in meetings where your ideas could change everything, because you've learned that the world doesn't always reward truth. It rewards comfort. And suddenly, your intelligence, this gift you carry, starts to feel like a curse. But here's the paradox. The more isolated a deep thinker becomes, the deeper their thoughts go. Because when the world won't listen, the mind turns inward. And for many, that's where the real transformation begins. It's in solitude that deep thinkers begin to see themselves not as broken, but as awake. And awakening, as every mystic, philosopher, and artist has known, is not a comfortable process. You start to realize that this discomfort, the disconnection, the alienation, isn't a flaw in you. It's a natural response to living in a world that prioritizes appearance over depth, speed over reflection, and noise over silence. You're not struggling because you're failing. You're struggling because you see too clearly. But clarity is heavy. It strips away the illusions most people rely on. It forces you to confront contradictions. It makes you feel everything, deeper, sharper, longer. And sometimes it hurts. It hurts when you see suffering that others ignore. It hurts when you watch people chase things that will never fulfill them. It hurts when you can't unsee the patterns, the cycles, the lies, the quiet desperation in people's eyes. But here's the thing, that pain has purpose. It's not here to destroy you. It's here to sharpen you, to break you open in the places where most people stay sealed shut. Because only when you're open, truly open, can you become the kind of person this world actually needs. And what kind of person is that? Someone who sees, but does not judge. Someone who knows, but does not condescend. Someone who feels, but is not consumed. A deep thinker with compassion, that's the key. Because if you let your intelligence become a wall, you become bitter, detached, cynical. You begin to resent the world for not meeting you where you are. But if you let your intelligence become a bridge, everything changes. You stop expecting people to be at your level, and you start meeting them where they are, without compromising your depth. You learn to speak in symbols, in stories, in stillness. You stop needing to be understood in the conventional sense, because you start realizing something profound. Depth doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. Some of the most transformative people in history didn't scream to be heard. They simply lived what they knew, quietly, persistently, with integrity. And their presence alone reshaped everything. This is the path of the mature thinker, not to overpower, but to illuminate, not to isolate, but to resonate. And yes, it's lonely, but not forever. Because once you stop hiding your depth, once you start owning it with calm, grounded presence, you begin to attract others like you. People who've also spent years feeling like outsiders. People who've also been told they're too much, or too serious, or too intense. You recognize them in the way their eyes linger, the way they ask questions that echo your own.
You start building a different kind of tribe, not based on status or entertainment, but on truth. These connections are rare, but they're real, and they're worth the wait. Because when deep thinkers find each other, something powerful happens. They remind each other that they're not crazy for seeing what they see. They stop carrying the weight alone. They start turning their insights into action, into art, into innovation, into healing. And little by little, they change the very culture that once rejected them. But none of that is possible if you keep silencing yourself. So here's what I want you to remember. Your mind is not a burden, it's a tool. Your depth is not a defect, it's a calling. Your loneliness is not proof that you're broken, it's proof that you haven't settled. Because the truth is, most people don't reject intelligence, they reject the mirror it holds up. They don't hate your ideas, they hate what your ideas make them feel. Insecure, exposed, uncertain. That's not your fault, and it's not your responsibility to fix their discomfort. Your responsibility is to stay rooted in what you know to be true, and to keep growing even if no one is watching. And eventually,